Why would you make a whole video on white? We all know what white means. Because who is white has changed over time, but you wouldn't know it by the way the media talks. And I would say who is black has changed over time too. Right? In Ben's world, white people are literally only English, Anglo-Saxon. Nobody else is white. And so it's just fascinating to me to see the origin story for this and how it has obviously changed over time. Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here with me on my channel. I'm Danielle Romero, and we dig into hidden history and American identity and all those things in between. Now today is going to be a very unique video compared to really anything else I've put out on my channel. A deep dive. I saw a lot of people calling these iceberg videos, and I really love the metaphor, so we're going to take it and roll with it. So we're going to use an iceberg metaphor to help us understand this idea of a free white person here in America, because white is a term that we hear all the time. And the way the metaphor works is basically just like an iceberg. You see the tip of the iceberg, is what basically everyone sees. This is just the most obvious kind of common understanding for this term. But just like an iceberg, there's more under the surface than what is initially visible. And so we're going to just go layer by layer by layer until we get to the bottom of this. So before we plunge into the depths, we're going to begin at the tip of the iceberg, a place where we are all familiar with. We're going to talk about the term white as it is commonly used in media. So when you flip on the news, you read articles on your phone or scroll through social media, you're going to encounter the word white. And it gets deployed in ways that to us might seem straightforward. We might say, well, why would you make a whole video on white? We all know what white means. Well, it's often used now to describe demographics, political leanings, social trends, and it often conjures up these images of an us versus them. It's whites versus blacks for the most part. But what if I told you that this surface level understanding is just the tip? It's just the sliver of a much larger, much more hidden iceberg. I just literally Googled white in the news and grabbed 2 headlines. So we're just gonna go with that. I didn't try to be picky about it. And I think both these headlines were both profoundly resonant for what we're talking about. The Atlantic had a piece from 2023, Black Success, White Backlash. Black prosperity has provoked white resentment that can make life exhausting for people of color. Okay, so hold that for a second. And then I want to jump over to this one from Slate, I believe, and it was an interview with an artist, a painter named Sylvia Snowden, and she said, quote, white people will show some black art and then it wears off. In the Atlantic's piece, we see white contrasted against this phrase of black prosperity, evoking themes of racial tension, power dynamics, identity. But the term remains amorphous. Who exactly falls into this white bracket? Is it a socioeconomic class? Is it a cultural group? Or is it literally, truly a skin color? Meanwhile, Sylvia Snowden's statement brings white into this cultural narrative, addressing this temporal appreciation of black art. But again, this ambiguity persists with this term white. When she mentions white people, to whom is she specifically alluding? Now, she may know what she means very specifically, but it's not really conveyed to us as the reader. Like, I'm thinking, okay, well, who are these white people? So through these headlines, it's evident that white, which is often a term that's taken at face value, carries layers of personal interpretations. You're bringing something to the table when you're reading this. So the media's portrayal prompts us to consider, I think, who are we really talking about when we say white? That's why this is the tip of the iceberg, because most people do not look below the surface. They just take it at face value. This is what the media says. This is what the media tells us to think. This is how the media wants you to talk and use language. But we need to go underneath the surface. We need to dig deep. So let's go just below the surface now. We're going to go to layer 2. This is the US Census. And we're going to talk about how the US Census has historically categorized race and ethnicity and the evolution of these categories over time. And the reason that this is number 2 is because people are pretty familiar with the census. They may not understand the ins and outs of it, but if you mention it, they're going to understand. The questions of race and identity often go along with this. Now, the inaugural US Census in 1790 featured a simplified but very ambiguous racial categorization. So the term was, you could be a free white person, you could be a slave, and then there was the category of all other free persons. So it painted a broad stroke of the nation's racial landscape, leaving a lot of room for interpreting whatever all other free persons looks like. So by the dawn of the 20th century, the census started to acknowledge the nation's complex racial fabric. It introduced the term mulatto, and which was showcasing America's growing recognition of a multiracial citizenry. But even as the categories expanded, the definitions remained blurry, leading to contentious court decisions and societal debates, which we're going to get to. Now, as America entered her contemporary era, the census is still striving to be more inclusive, and it started allowing multiracial identifications. However, even with all of these modifications, there's still more questions. So even though they're adding all these groups, you could say, well, where do Hispanics fit? That's a question, right? Is white synonymous with Caucasian? And what constitutes white in a country that is continually redefining herself? So the implications of the census classifications do reach far and wide. The census is such an interesting, amazing place to pull data and information. So it's vital to acknowledge that while these classifications do offer insight into who is white, what is white, it still can oversimplify the intricate dynamics of just who you are as a person. And just like with an iceberg, what's visible just under the surface is still only a fragment of a much deeper and more complex reality. And now we're going to go a little bit deeper. Most people do not go this far. Most people have no idea what we're about to touch on. And so I applaud you for learning if this is new to you. We're going to look at the judicial lens. Now, in the early 20th century, the Supreme Court took on the challenging tasks of defining who could be deemed a white person. So now the Supreme Court has to answer this question. And this was in the context of US naturalization laws. There was no way to become a US citizen after 1870 unless you were either a free white person or of African ancestry. So in 1922, Ozawa versus the United States, the court denied naturalization to Takao Ozawa, who was a Japanese immigrant, saying that white persons were popularly known as the Caucasian race. So they said, he argued that he had white skin, so he should be counted as a free white person and he could naturalize. He's like, look at me, I'm white. Part of the court case, he says, like, I'm whiter than most of you in this room. My skin is so light, I'm obviously white. Well, the retort from the court was that white people are actually Caucasian. So yes, your skin is white, but you're not Caucasian, so you're not the right kind of white. So that created some confusion because then there was this is in 1922. Well, that clarity was short-lived because in 1923, the court ruled in another court case. It was the United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind. He was a high caste Hindu, and he was ineligible for naturalization. His argument was that he was born in an area of India where he would be considered Aryan or Caucasian. And because in the previous court case, they said, well, you can't count as white unless you're Caucasian. He said, well, I'm Caucasian, so I should count as white. The court rejected his claim, as you probably guess. And this decision prioritized the common man's understanding of white person. So basically, the judge said, if you walk down the street and people don't think you're white, you're not white. Naturalization officials sought to clear the guidelines because people are trying to naturalize and they can't naturalize if they can't prove that they're either of African descent or white. And a lot of these folks, there was no chance of proving that they were from Africa or had African heritage. Now, the Immigration Act of 1924 further muddied these waters. The act essentially barred from immigrating those who are ineligible to naturalize. So like you can't immigrate if you're not even eligible to become a citizen. And this led to even more confusion. This decision showcases this fluidity, this inconsistency in defining whiteness legally. Now, these landmark cases didn't just impact the individuals involved. They set legal precedents, like there was real world effects to this that affected our immigration policies, our naturalization processes, and this broader societal perception of race in America, who counted as white and who didn't. Now, the judicial system has played a pivotal role pivotal role. They have played like one of the they're like the main character in the role of constructing and deconstructing racial identities in the United States. I really believe that. They often reinforce a narrow, exclusive notion of what it means to be white in America. Now, obviously, these are cases from 100 years ago. So this is not an issue now, but when we're talking about our grandparents' generation, this is what they were growing up in. Where did all of this stuff come from? Well, we need to talk about the Naturalization Acts. These are the things that the court is interpreting to decide whether or not someone counts as white so that they can become a citizen. Well, we need to go back to those acts now. So let's go back to those. So delving into the very foundation of America's legal structures, we can't overlook the Naturalization Acts. These set the precedent for who could become an American citizen, and thereby they established a criteria for belonging based on race and ethnicity. So the initial test to see if you're allowed to become a citizen, it entirely hinged on your race and ethnicity. So first, there's the Naturalization Act of 1790. So this is just a handful of years after America has become a nation. It was passed by the first Congress of the United States on March 26, 1790. This act was our country's first legislative endeavor to outline the process of acquiring citizenship. Like, this is the first time they're putting, I was going to say pen to paper, putting quill to paper to kind of figure out, okay, how do we determine who is allowed to be citizens? Now that we're a nation, how do we figure this out? Well, the phrase free white persons in this act is particularly notable. So at first, citizenship was just limited to free white persons of good character. And so this act explicitly excluded Native Americans, free Black people, people of African ancestry, other non-European races, the privileges of citizenship. This original legal framework entrenched these racial hierarchies, and it was the first of many subsequent acts to define who could and couldn't be American. Now, the Naturalization Act of 1870 came next. And so if you know your American history, you know 1870, this is corresponding with the Emancipation Proclamation, the end of the Civil War. And so this post-Civil War era marked significant shifts in racial attitudes, partly due to the abolition of slavery. And so consequently, on July 14th, 1870, the Naturalization Act of 1870 was passed. This is an update to the original. So this revised act allowed for now persons of African nativity or descent to become citizens. So you either had to prove you were a free white person or you were of African nativity or descent. And that reflects a concession to the African American community, because now they have all these people who've been freed and they're saying, yes, you can become a citizen. Technically, like, you know what I mean? Like, you know that a lot of people weren't really happy about this, but this is what they decided to do. But it's crucial to note that this was not extended universally. Many Asian immigrants and other non-white populations continued to still be excluded from this act of naturalization. And I want to just footnote here. I understand that becoming a citizen doesn't mean you were treated like one. And I'm not arguing that that was the case. Definitely, even though people of African heritage were allowed to technically become citizens, even after that, we have the Jim Crow laws, right? Like, that's happening to citizens. But these acts underscore a critical point as we're diving deep into this iceberg. The legal definition of white, or any racial term, is not static. It changes in response to political pressures, societal shifts, and evolving racial ideologies. We've seen how this has changed already over time. So by using race as a determinant for citizenship, the country institutionalized racial hierarchy. Like, there's no other way to look at it. And I hate to say this because I love America. I think she's a great nation. I think that the ingredients are all there to make us an even better nation in the future. But at this point, this is how it was set up. Now, obviously, these acts have been superseded. They are no longer on the books. And has it changed? Yes. Yes. But I do think that there are consequences to setting things up this way. If you're ready to go to the lowest levels of this iceberg, places where almost no one else has gone. Let's go. We are actually going to go even earlier than the 1790 Naturalization Act. And we're going to meet up with our friend, founding father, Ben Franklin, who was never a US president. I found that a lot of people do believe he was a president. I think probably because he's on money and, everyone knows Ben Franklin. But he wrote an essay 20 years before America became independent from Great Britain. And it was an essay from 1755. So we are at like the bottom of the iceberg right now. It was called Observations Concerning the Increasing of Mankind and Peopling of Countries. And in it, he reflected on the kind of people he would like to see settle in the colonies. So this is like just such a fascinating and really influential document. And I'm really surprised it doesn't get a lot more attention, because this is a founding father before the country is America. Like, maybe the idea was there that this could possibly happen, but at the time they're still under, Great Britain. But still, this is the mindset. And I'm not going to read the whole letter. It's super long, but it's extremely relevant. And this is what he says at the end, quote, "The number of purely white people in the world is proportionately very small." So here we go. Who is white? Well, Ben Franklin's going to tell us his ideas in 1755. "All of Africa is black or tawny. Asia, chiefly tawny. America, exclusive of the newcomers, meaning themselves, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, the French, the Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion. And, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted. Who would the English make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth? I wish their numbers were increased." So he's saying, listen, when we're looking at the whole world, what we consider white is just a fraction. So let's go back to the media. Let's go back to the way the media talks about white people doing this, white people doing that. Well, in Ben's world, white people are literally only English, Anglo-Saxon. Nobody else is white. And so it's just fascinating to me to see the origin story for this and how it has obviously changed over time. So he said, "I wish their numbers were increased. Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity, by excluding all blacks and tawnies," of tawnies, "of increasing the lovely white and red." And I did a video on this before. If you're interested in a deep dive on this, I'll leave the link. I actually did a deep dive on, all these court cases I've talked about, and I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to see that. But when he's talking about white and red, he's not talking about red as a Native American, because he already referenced the Native Americans. He was calling them tawny. What he's saying is, white people who have kind of a pinkish hue to their skin. And he goes on to say, "But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind." So, when we're talking about who is white, one of my big arguments on this channel is researching this American identity and kind of delving into this question, because who is white has changed over time, but you wouldn't know it by the way the media talks. And I would say who is black has changed over time too, right? But you wouldn't know it by the way headlines are written and things like that. And so doing a deep dive like this is super important. We're getting to the origin story. And it's just, I think, a great metaphor to use this iceberg of what do most people see and understand and what's really below the surface. So if you made it through this video, I thank you so much for educating yourself and learning with me as I am learning. And if you're interested in the other videos that I did deep dives on the court cases and all of that, I will link to that below, and we will talk soon.